Greetings and a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Shwastika, your assigned moderator from VetNet, and it is my proud privilege to extend a heartfelt welcome to all the delegates joining us from across the country. We're indeed fortunate to have the valuable supports of esteemed doctors, and I express my gratitude to each one of you for dedicating your time to be with us today. VetNet offers a dynamic online learning platform designed to empower veterinary doctors with the latest knowledge and skills, providing expert led courses, certifications, and resources. VetNet helps veterinarians to stay ahead of advancements in animal care, medical practices, and industry standards. Elevate your veterinary career with flexible, accessible education tailored to enhance expertise and improvement patient outcomes. VetNet is honored to be associated as a digital partner for this esteemed event organized by Veterinary Association of India. And we are truly delighted to collaborate with such a respected professional body to contribute to the success of this academic initiative. And now, I extend a warm welcome to all the participants for today's insightful session. And we are delighted to have with us our esteemed host, Ms. Yashika Pandey, fourth year MJFCVAS, President of VAILC, MGFCVAS, and Ms. Dabas, Ma'am, Secretary of Students Forum, whose efforts and coordination have made this session possible. So now let's proceed with today's session. Over to you, Bhavna, ma'am.
Thank you, Swastika. Good evening, everybody. I am Bhavna Danavas, and I'm the current secretary of the Veterinary Association of India Students Forum. And it is my pleasure to serve as your host for today's international webinar. On behalf of VAI warmly welcome you all to the session, which is on One Health in Action, Managing Transboundary Animal Diseases and Animal Mortality During Outbreaks and Disasters. We are delighted to have veterinary students, academicians, researchers, and practitioners joining us from across India as well as from different parts of the world. Your presence reflects the growing importance of global collaboration in veterinary public health, biosecurity, and One Health initiatives. Before we proceed further, I would like to briefly introduce the Veterinary Association of India. The Veterinary Association of India, or VAI, is a premier national body dedicated to representing, empowering, and supporting veterinarians across the country. Formed under the aegis of the AgroVet Research and Development Foundation, a certified nonprofit organization, VAI works with a strong commitment towards professional excellence, ethical veterinary practice, scientific advancement, and animal welfare. To know more about VAI and its membership, you may visit our website at vai.org.in. Veterinary students interested in leadership opportunities and academic collaborations are with us. Before we begin with today's session, I would like to invite EAI local chapter at MG. Over to you, Yashika.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to all respected dignitaries and participants. I am Yashika Pandey, a final year student at MJF CVAS and currently serving as President of VA local chapter at MJF CVS. It is a pleasure to be part of today's webinar and learn from such an experienced international speaker, Mr. Gary Flory, and I'm looking forward to an engaging and insightful session ahead. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Yashika will be helping us with the Q&A session today, and we are additionally joined by representatives from VetNet and ClearNet, our digital partner, and we sincerely appreciate their continued support in making this webinar possible. It is now my great honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker for today, Mr. Gary Flory. Mr. Gary Flory is an internationally recognized expert in animal disease outbreak response, emergency management, biosecurity, and carcass disposal operations during disasters and disease outbreaks. He's the founder of Global Outbreak Solutions and has worked extensively with government agencies, veterinary organizations, and emergency response team across the United States and internationally. Over the course of his distinguished career, Mr. Flory has played a critical role in developing strategies for managing transboundary animal diseases, controlling outbreaks, and handling animal mortality during large-scale emergencies. His expertise in preparedness planning, biosecurity implementation, and emergency response training has contributed significantly to strengthening One Health frameworks worldwide. Thank you, Mr. Gary Flory, for joining us today and for taking the time to share your expertise with all of us. Now, without further delay, I now invite Mr. Gary Flory to begin today's session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bhavna. Thank you, Yashika. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really want to just take a few moments and share with you here today about the topic of managing transboundary animal diseases with a particular focus on mortality management. The reason that I focus so much on mortality management is because it's an issue that tends to get overlooked. Whereas it is really a critical component of the whole outbreak response practice. So with that, let's go ahead and get moving on. Bhavna has already done a great job of giving you my background. I do quite a bit of work with a broad range of organizations, including FAO and WOA and Pan American Health Organization and others. And I currently serve on FAO's African Swine Fever Pool of Expertise and WOA's Standing Group of Experts on African Swine Fever for Asia and the Pacific. So with that, let's go ahead and start with just a foundation. So these are all things that most of you on this webinar know and understand, but I just want to get all of us on the same page. So these are my assertions to start with. And first of all, again, this is really a One Health focused webinar. So I want to make it clear that humans, animals, and the environment are all inextricably interconnected, meaning we can't really focus on human health or animal health or environmental health without thinking about the implications on the broad range of global health. And so failing to effectively manage animal carcasses during disease outbreaks can have, or any other aspects of animal disease outbreaks can have significant human health and environmental implications. Okay, so those of us in the veterinary animal disease area, what we do is critical for that broader human health, environmental health practice. Okay, and then here again, known by most all of you here on this webinar, but what is a zoonotic disease? So it is any infectious disease that can be transmitted, sometimes by a vector, from other animals, both wild and domestics, to humans or from humans to animals. So lots of diseases that we think about today are zoonotic diseases, and they do have implications from the animal side to the human side as well. Why do we care? Well, these zoonotic diseases have significant impacts on human health. So here you can see 2.5 billion, and that's billion with a B, cases of illness caused every year by zoonotic diseases, resulting in 2.7 million deaths. So very, very significant implication on human health, human suffering from these diseases that often originate in animals. Just to take one disease as an example, rabies, for example, causes almost 60,000 deaths every year with $8.6 billion in economic loss. So these diseases have very significant implications for human health. As we look over the years, there have been a number of diseases that have caused very significant human suffering, human death over the years, all of which are zoonotic. Yeah, so if we go all the way back to 1918, we think of the Spanish flu. That's the one that we talk about a lot whenever we face a new disease challenge because of the implications, 50 million deaths thereabout associated with it. But you can see a number of diseases that we have been exposed to and have been challenged by over the years. So you can see diseases like SARS and the Hendra virus, Nipah virus, Ebola virus. Obviously, most recently, we think of the COVID-19 very significant implications. And we've got hantavirus now, a new Ebola outbreak, all of which, again, are zoonotic diseases that have very significant implications, as you can see here, on human health. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of what you all do. You all have invested your education, your career focused on animal diseases, and why is that important? Well, let's think about how diseases occur. So when we have exposure of disease agents to animals, so we have that bell curve there during that exposure. After exposure, that's when we begin to see those clinical signs in those animals. Once we have, this is a zoonotic disease, once we have those clinical signs in animals, those animals start to shed the virus, then we have that exposure in humans. After the exposure in humans, then we start to see the clinical signs in humans, and then we go and seek medical care from that exposure and from those symptoms. The key that's important here is, what does it cost to control a disease outbreak, an outbreak of a zoonotic disease? Well, if we are able to control that outbreak very early on, when those animals are just beginning to show those clinical signs, the cost to eradicate that outbreak is quite low. But the further down that we wait in this timeline, once we have exposure to humans, once we have clinical signs in humans, once humans begin to seek medical care, you can see that the cost to control that outbreak increases significantly. And this really goes towards the critical need to make sure that we have good communication between our veterinary professionals and our human health professionals, so that we can actually respond more quickly and do a better job of minimizing costs, certainly. But I think most importantly, we're thinking here about suffering in animals, suffering in humans, caused from those diseases. There's also very significant environmental implications from these transboundary animal diseases. Of course, I'm talking now more broadly about transboundary animal diseases, not all of the diseases that we have concerns about, from those of you in the veterinary profession, are zoonotic. But I just wanted to make sure that we understood the implication of those zoonotic diseases. But for a broader range of animal diseases, those transboundary animal diseases, failure to manage them correctly can have significant implications. So here is just one example where we had significant outbreaks of African swine fever in the Philippines. They had worked tirelessly to eradicate the disease throughout much of the Philippines. Unfortunately, carcass disposal has an implication. So deep burial as a carcass disposal method is certainly the most common method used quite widely around the world. But the challenge with deep burial is that it does not inactivate the virus. We're putting those carcasses in a place where there's not exposure to oxygen, there's not exposure to microorganisms. Therefore, those viruses last longer, and they're viable longer. In this particular case, there was a hurricane which caused flooding, which exposed those carcasses that had been buried to the surface. And what we had was significant outbreaks of African swine fever in areas that had been African swine fever free, because of that exposure to the viruses that were in those carcasses that had previously been buried. So that's just one example. Another example here is that, again, the point that I'm trying to make here is that when we use deep burial, we don't have a lot of biological activity that is typically involved in the inactivation of those viruses. So here, as we look at avian influenza, groundwater studies in areas where they had outbreaks of avian influenza actually found virus particles, the RNA of that virus, in the groundwater wells at those sites. Just another example here, this picture at the scale, it's kind of hard to tell what that is, but that is a river that has turned red. because of exposure to leachate from infected carcasses, pig carcasses, during an African swine fever outbreak. So it's hard to tell the scale, but again, that is a river that is red. But I do want to be clear here. The river is red. It's true, it's red because of the blood and the leachate from those carcasses, but it's not the blood that makes that river red. It's the nutrients from the leachate from those animals. Those nutrients caused a bacterial bloom, which is what turned it red. The unfortunate thing, and what you don't see here, is when we have a nutrient that is introduced into a system like this, once those microorganisms use all of the oxygen that's in that water, in that river, then those microorganisms will die. The river turns black, and everything in that river will die as well. So, very significant environmental implications from the mismanagement of animal carcasses as well. So, why am I so focused on carcass management and how we deal with our animal carcasses during outbreaks of transboundary animal disease? Well, first of all, it's because animals are made up of a significant amount of water. For example, here we have broilers, 70% water. If we're talking about piglets, piglets are 80% water. Adult pigs, because more of their bones have ossified, are only about 55% water. But regardless, animals in themselves are made up of a significant amount of water. That's important, not because of water. Certainly, water is good. We drink water. We like to swim in water and bathe in water. It's not the water in that leachate that we're so concerned about. It's what's in that water. So the leachate from animal carcasses has a significant number of chemical constituents. Even if we look at just one here, that's important. I'll just focus on nitrate. So if you can see here, nitrate. The average concentration of nitrate in carcass leachate is 2,000 parts per million, or milligrams per liter. That is a significant amount of nitrate, whereas the drinking water standard for nitrate is generally, and it varies around the world, but what is considered the average drinking water standard for nitrate is 10 parts per million. So you can see that the leachate from animal carcasses is over 1,000 times higher than the drinking water standard. And it can cause significant implications both to aquatic life, but also if we drink it, there's blue baby syndrome is one implication. But again, it can cause that aquatic plant growth, which ultimately can result in killing the life in the aquatic systems themselves. But it's not just the chemicals that we're concerned about. Animals are warm-blooded animals, and because of that, they have a number of things, a number of organisms in there that we don't want in our drinking water supplies, that we don't want in our surface waters: E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, plus the viruses that ultimately killed the animals to start with, such as the influenza virus, for example. And depending upon how those animals were raised, they might have pharmaceuticals in them as well, hormones, antimicrobials, again, components that we don't want in our drinking water supplies. Okay. As those carcasses decompose, we have a number of gases as well. Those gas, methane, for example, sulfur dioxide, just a number of gases that can be a nuisance or can potentially cause harm. If we are burning those carcasses, there are some other things that we need to be concerned about as well: particulate matter, dioxins, metals, etc. So, even with burning, there are implications to the environment and to public health. So with that, what I want to do is just give a little bit of history on carcass management. So I want to talk about the sort of the transition and the change in philosophy for carcass management that really got me involved in my area of expertise, which is focusing on not just the broader implications to responding to these transboundary animal diseases, but why I focus so much on carcass disposal. So this very, very simple pie chart is explaining how carcasses were disposed of during an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza in Virginia in 1983. So I'm using this example not because I was involved back at that time, but because this is the same state where I live and where I ultimately became involved in carcass management activities. So I wanted to really use this as an example because I can trace it back from this history to what we're doing now. So as you can see here, what happened when we had animal diseases. Basically, what happened here is what happens in most of the rest of the world. When we have dead animals, we dig a hole, we bury those animals in the ground, and we move on and we cover them up and we forget about it. We don't think about it anymore. The part that's interesting and the part that I want to point out here is the index case. So the very first case during this disease outbreak was a turkey farm. They buried the turkeys on the farm, and the neighbor who lived next to them, a couple of weeks later, they started noticing that their drinking water that came from a well, not too far from where they buried the turkeys, started having a strange odor, a strange taste. They did some testing, and the bacteria levels were through the roof. And so they complained and they said, "Hey, burying these animals is contaminating my groundwater. Something needs to happen. This isn't right." But it was 1983, and people didn't really think too much about environmental protection and human health implications of agricultural practices as they do today. And so nothing really happened. But again, that neighbor was very concerned about the implication to his well. So that takes us to an outbreak of avian influenza in 2002. And this is actually where I became involved in this whole issue of animal mortality management. So this outbreak, ironically, the index case, the very first case of avian influenza here was the exact same poultry farm. It was a turkey farm, the exact same farm that was the index case in 1983. So what happened is that index case that the farmer went and they dug a hole and they were about to bury the animals, and the neighbor who was still living next door to them said, "Wait a minute, don't you remember what happened in 1983? My well became contaminated. I've treated my well ever since then to make sure it was safe for me to drink. You shouldn't be able to do this again. Look what you did to me. You shouldn't do this to other people." Well, this time, sort of the world had changed, and people's understanding and people's perspective on protecting the environment, protecting public health had changed. And because of that, again, and I want to give some background, this is an area where it's a rural area, it's a farming area. 80% of the people in this area rely on groundwater for their drinking water supply. And so protection of groundwater is very important in this area. So the thing is, when the neighbors started complaining this time, it actually got people's attention. And so what happened is the government said, "Well, you're right. We really need to be protecting our groundwater so that we're not going to bury the animals that are from this disease outbreak." Because of that, what happened is that there was no planning because everyone just assumed that they would do deep burial like they did before. So there was no good methods and no good planning, no activities or research had been done to come up with other disposal methods. So we tried lots of different things, and they all went horribly, to be perfectly honest with you, because we hadn't done the planning and because we really didn't understand carcass disposal methods. And again, this is where I became involved, and we started, doing the best we can, trying a bunch of different methods, which really, as I said, none of them worked well at all. because of that, I began doing research on disposal methods, and we really spent a lot of focus on composting in particular for responding to avian influenza. And with that research, we convinced the industry that that was a good approach, and we used it on some small outbreaks in 2007 that we had, which built the foundation. So when we had the high path avian influenza outbreak of 2015, we were able to implement composting through many of the farms throughout the United States. Okay, so our processes changed significantly so that during this outbreak, 2015, and it was at the time the largest animal disaster in the United States to date. So it impacted more than 50 million animals, uh, both chickens and turkeys, ducks as well. But because of that research that we had done and the studies and the trials that we had done, and also because we were able to implement it on some farms early on, we ended up using composting for 85% of those birds, the manure, the litter, the eggs, the feed, etc., from those 50 million birds that had to be disposed of at that time. You can see here, we still did a little bit of burial, a little bit of incineration and landfilling, but the majority of those 50 million birds were composted along with the manure and litter and eggs associated with them. So significant shift, significant change. So the next thing that I would like to do here is just to give you an overview of carcass disposal methods, because there are a number of tools that can be used. There is no perfect tool. But I think I've already sort of described why I am not a fan of deep burial. This, again, is the most common disposal method for carcasses worldwide, but there can be some implications. And I just want to show you this diagram to show you that. You can see here we have a burial pit. We have leachate coming out of that burial pit, getting into the groundwater, and then we have a well down gradient that's actually taking up that leachate. So if that was a well that was feeding animals, there's the potential to spread the disease to those animals. If it was a well that was for human consumption, you can have the same sort of impact that I described to you for the neighbor's well who was next to that turkey burial site. So these are all certainly concerns. That's not to say that deep burial isn't a method that we can use in the right area with the right considerations, but if we don't do it well, we can have these kind of implications. And the other thing about deep burial is we often think about it as something that we can do very quickly. We cover it up, and there aren't any implications from it. Well, here's just some pictures from some burial sites that I've been on. When you put those animals in the ground and they start to break down, you put all that soil on top of it. That soil is heavy, and you can see here what's happening is that it is squeezing that leachate in the burial pits. Some of it is coming out of the ground, running out the ground surface. In this case, it was getting into a surface water body, but we don't know what's happening below the ground surface. And that really is the scary part. The other thing that you can notice in the picture on the right is when those animals start to settle, you're going to get cracking on that cap, that soil cap that you put over that burial pit. And what you really can't see here in this picture is that coming out of that crack are thousands, millions actually, of flies that are being attracted to the odors from that burial pit. They are actually laying their eggs down in there and hatching. And what we have is we have a disease concern as we have that contact with the flies with those infected carcasses. The next method I wanted to share with you is a relatively newer method. It's shallow burial with carbon. Basically, instead of digging a deep trench, what we are doing is we're digging a much shallower trench. So we're digging a trench that is 60 centimeters deep, as opposed to a trench that is 3 meters deep or 4 meters deep or 2 meters deep or whatever is common in that area. And that's really important because what we know is that we have a lot of biological activity in that shallow soil zone. Lots of microorganisms, we have worms, we have beetles, we have other activity that are going on in that shallow zone. But the other thing I want to point out here is in addition to having a shallow trench, we also have 30 centimeters of carbon material. And by carbon material, what I mean by that is something like sawdust or wood chips or wood shavings or a crop residue like straw or hay, rice hulls, etc. So we have that carbon material in the bottom. That carbon material does a few things. First of all, it provides elemental carbon that microorganisms need for their reproductive processes. So in order to go through that metabolic process of reproducing and creating new microorganisms, they need that carbon. The other thing that that does is that carbon material creates an area that actually absorbs that leachate that comes out of those animals as they decompose, creating an area that traps that leachate so that there's less potential for them to migrate down vertically through the soil to potentially contaminate groundwater. And then finally, that carbon material also traps oxygen in between those pore spaces that the microorganisms can also use during their metabolic processes. So we've dug our shallow trench, we place carbon in the bottom, we place our carcasses on top of the carbon, and then we took 60 centimeters of soil out. We're going to place that 60 centimeters of soil back over top of the animal and then plant vegetation. So that soil cover is going to protect the animal from scavengers. That vegetative layer is going to stabilize the soil, but it's also going to have roots that penetrate down through that zone. It's going to take up nutrients, take up moisture, so that there is less potential for groundwater contamination. So that's in a summary, but the best way really is to show you what that looks like. You can see here that we're digging the trench. We've placed carbon material in this case. It's wood shaving in the bottom, placing our animals in the trench, and then we'll begin to cover it with soil as you can see here, and then we plant vegetation. One of the things I do want to point out here, this particular photograph is a very arid area of the country. This is actually in the western part of the United States. You can see that the vegetation here over top of the shallow barrel with carbon trench is lush and green compared to the vegetation that is beside it. And that is because those roots are penetrating down. They're actually penetrating down beyond 60 centimeters, taking up nutrients, taking up moisture, so they have all the moisture and nutrients they need versus the area around it. You'll notice here there's a temporary fence that was put up around this. That's because this part of the country had coyote activity, very significant coyote activity. There was some concerns about coyotes digging into it, so we put that fencing up. We did have game cameras out there with taking pictures whenever there was motion. It turns out we didn't have any coyote activity, but they opted to put that fencing up just to be sure. Done lots of research around this, and what we find is that within this shallow barrel with carbon system, we can inactivate a number of different pathogens, so pox virus, Seneca Valley virus, a bacteria there, Clostridium perfringens, African swine fever, highly pathogenic avian influenza. So this is not just a system that we encase our animals in like deep burial, but we actually have biological activity because we're in that shallow soil zone. Just to give you an example of one of those projects, this is looking at African swine fever, and I'm choosing to share this with you because African swine fever is pretty well known to be one of the hardier viruses that stays around in the environment longer. And so in this particular research project that I did in Vietnam, we had 44 carcasses that were all positive for African swine fever. We collected samples throughout that project at day 1, 3, 5, 7, and you can see all the way through 288. we were sampling in two different places. So the spleen, that is a area of the soft tissue that's known to have the highest concentration of African swine fever virus. But we also wanted to look at the most protective area of that pig. Where would the virus be most protective? And so we looked at the femur, the bone marrow in the femur of those animals, because that femur is protected by a large amount of meat. The bone itself was protecting the bone marrow that was inside the femur. And so those are the areas that we were looking at for inactivating virus. And so we did PCR testing, and uh, we actually did virus isolation testing, and then finally we did bone marrow, or I'm sorry, we did a bioassay to ensure that our results were adequate. And what we found was that we did find some DNA for ASF up to 28 days. But it's not important that we have DNA, okay? Because DNA on its own cannot necessarily cause disease. What was important is whether that virus was viable or not. And so what we found is that we had no viable virus after 5 days. So from 5 days to 35 days, there was no viable virus at all in those systems. Okay, so we find these biological systems like composting, like shallow barrow with carbon, don't just store our carcasses like deep burial does, but they actually inactivate the virus through that biological activity. We've also used it for avian influenza outbreaks. You can see this here on a large layer operation. This particular operation had more than 2 million birds. And, we were placing the carcasses here. You can see us placing them, getting them to the right depth and the right shape, and then covering them up. So next, I wanted to talk about composting. Composting in itself is not overly complicated. It's just three components. There's a base layer that allows oxygen to flow into it. There's the core, and that's where we have all of our infected material, like our carcasses, eggs, litter, feed, etc., if we're talking about poultry. And then we have a cap that insulates that pile, keeps the odors in, keeps the heat in, so that we get that biological activity that we need. Just wanted to show you some pictures of what that looks like within a commercial poultry operation. We can certainly do this on backyard farms, and we can do this with lots of species, but just to walk you through, this is high-path avian influenza with turkeys. These are the birds after they died from the disease. We cleared the center. We laid our base material. That's the area that I told you that allows the oxygen to flow in. We're now adding our core, which is a mixture of the litter and the birds and the feed. And then we cap it with carbon material. We can do it obviously with livestock as well. That process is similar. Here we've laid our base. We're starting to place our animals. We're adding some carbon on top of those animals, adding another layer of animals on top of that, and then begin to cover that so that we have a complete windrow. Okay. All very critical, all very important that we manage these effectively. We certainly talked about the zoonotic disease issue earlier. I just want to emphasize that avian influenza, although we don't think about it in the same way that we think about, say, Ebola or anthrax, et cetera, but it does have some zoonotic implications in humans as well, as you're all very much aware. Also, considerations within the dairy industry for us in the US. I don't think that has yet been a challenge for you in India, but we are, as you well know, we have identified high-path avian influenza in cattle, produces that drop in milk production, and does cause other issues within our dairy cows as well. But it also has the potential for causing sickness in humans. Okay, so this has been a real challenge for us in the United States, and we also have other considerations too for high path avian influenza. So even our companion animals, like the cat that you see here, we have the same type of high path considerations there as well. So we can have exposure either to poultry itself or for product made, pet food, for example, made from raw meat that hasn't been pasteurized or raw milk, and again causes sickness and potentially death in animals. And we also have concerns about, whether there are public health implications also. So again, all issues that I think is very important. As we talk about One Health, though, I think it's really important to look at, so how do we actually do something about that? How do we improve our communication between sectors? How does our veterinary public health, how does our human health, how does our environmental health organizations all communicate and work together? I just wanted to share this project that I did just as an example. So Heifer International is an organization that helps farmers improve their livelihood. I did a project for their Asia countries where we actually had a workshop where we invited the participants. This was in Cambodia, so it included Cambodia, but it was also India, Nepal, Bangladesh. We brought participants there. We did a training to make sure that everyone understood all of the One Health implications of agricultural activities, and then we developed work plans for each country so that they could implement during their normal day-to-day activities One Health practices. But the outcome, which I'm very excited about and proud of, is that we developed a One Health strategy for Heifer International for how they implement One Health during their field activities. And although you obviously are not part of Heifer International, I really just share this with you as a model or a potential for, intentionally looking at your field activities, the day-to-day activities, and how you might be able to place a concerted effort on actually implementing One Health practices during those activities. Just wanted to share some resources that I have worked on. So I mentioned to you composting and shallow burial with carbon. We have some resources here that I helped write for USDA. So we drafted for them a composting protocol for highly pathogenic avian influenza. We drafted a protocol for composting for livestock, and we developed this one in the middle is a protocol for implementing shallow burial with carbon. A couple of documents that I helped create for FAO. So this focus on document, this is really a decision support document to help participants, practitioners choose a disposal method during a disease outbreak that's going to be most effective. And the carcass management guidelines themselves really are the tool to help you implement how you actually go step by step through each of the carcass disposal methods to implement them well. All right, so I did rush through that because I wanted to make sure that we did have time for questions, but I really appreciate you allowing me to go very rapidly through that content, and I'd love to take some questions if you have them. So, Bhavna, I'm going to turn that back to you and see if we have some questions.
Thank you, sir, for your that insightful and informative presentation. Your experience and practical perspective on outbreak preparedness, transboundary animal disease, and disaster response have been truly valuable and inspiring for all of us. Now we will open the floor for question and answer session. Participants can they pose their questions on the comment sections.
Thank you, Yashika.
So just a minute. So the first question is asked by Dr. Rohan Mehta.
What are the biggest challenges faced during the control of transboundary animal diseases outbreak in rural areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, in many rural areas, the two biggest challenges that we often face are in the area of depopulation and disposal. So, within the area of depopulation, within WOA, there are some criteria for how we do depopulation of sick and infected animals in a humane way. Um, Sometimes those methods require some resources, they require some training, and sometimes we don't have the resources, we don't have the time to provide that additional training or to have the resources that's necessary to implement really humane depopulation methods. So one of the challenges is we find ourselves in a position where maybe we haven't put together an actual plan for implementing depopulation. Therefore, we use methods that are not as humane as we would like. So, actually developing a plan, implementing a plan, providing training, making sure we have equipment to implement depopulation. So, the humane death of those sick and infected animals uh, well. So that is a challenge. And then, secondly, it is the carcass disposal. I know you knew I was going to say that because that's an area where I focus. But the reality is we don't spend much time talking about carcass disposal because for thousands of years, whenever humans had a part of an animal carcass that they couldn't use, they buried it. And so it's a practice that we all know, we all understand. It's easy, it's cheap, and we do deep burial all the time without thought. And the reality is it can be okay with a few animals in the right place, but done poorly, it can have all of the implications that I talked about before. So the two challenges that I see most significant are having humane depopulation methods to make sure that those sick animals are uh, depopulated or killed in a manner that is humane and effective and biosecure. And finally, making sure that we have disposal methods that are appropriate, that don't create other challenges for us, either environmental challenges or public health challenges, because we tend to default to what we know and what we're familiar with, which is deep burial. Excellent question. Thank you, Yoshika.
Sir, next question is from Ananya Roy. How One Health approach improve coordination between veterinary and public health sectors during outbreaks?
So that is a really good question and one that I have seen very much transition over the years. So when I was first involved in animal disease outbreaks, there was very little involvement in public health with public health and very little communication. So what has improved over the years in many places is that whenever we have a disease outbreak, we are finding that we have engagement by all sectors. So we have engagement by emergency management, we have engagement by veterinary services, we have engagement by public health, we have engagement by environmental health as well. So we are communicating with our public health people. Here are responders. Here are the activities that they are doing. Now, when I respond to a disease outbreak, my local health department will reach out to me after the outbreak, 10 days, and they'll call me up and they'll say, Gary, we understand you've been on this disease outbreak. Are you having any symptoms? Do you have any health concerns? To make sure that we are better protecting our responders. We are being more aware when people do have symptoms to make sure that they're not they're taking the appropriate precautions not to spread the disease as well. But also, it is important that we do a better job of sharing information at the laboratory level. As test results are coming in for an animal disease? Is that a disease that has zoonotic potential? And if so, are we communicating that information with our public health people as well? So those are just a couple examples, I think, of good communication that is helpful in the response to a disease, but also helps us control an outbreak more quickly when we have that communication and we're better prepared so that uh, responders can take the protections that they need to make sure that they're protecting themselves, implement the biosecurity that's necessary to make sure that they're protecting their family also.
Over next question, Dr. Vivek Nair, Junior Veterinary Officer, Kochi, Kerala. He asked, as per your experience, what are the most effective biosecurity measures during large-scale disease outbreak?
So, obviously, implementing a good quarantine is important, and I know that that is challenging. When we implement a quarantine, all of our responders respect that quarantine, and they need to understand that we do at times have challenges convincing the producer, the farmer, about that, particularly as we deal with backyard farms, because on a backyard farms, that area is basically part of their home. It's part of their residence, so they're not used to implementing good biosecurity practices on the farm. So one of the things that we really try to invest a lot of time in is helping people understand the importance of good biosecurity. Obviously, biosecurity can get very technical and very complicated and very expensive, but really simple biosecurity is really the place to start, and what we can especially do in low income parts of the country and with producers who are smaller, backyard type farmers. So issues like separation. We need to, separate our animal production areas from our living areas. We need to have clear lines of delineation of what are production areas that we're not allowing, neighbors and visitors to enter. We also need to be thinking about separation of clean animals, our existing herds. If we introduce a new animal, we need to have some sort of isolation to make sure that that animal isn't sick before we introduce them to the animals. We need to have some good understanding of disinfection practices as well. Where in Southeast Asia, for example, in Vietnam, where we were working, we were finding really good success working with producers to help understand the value of disinfecting their equipment and before it comes onto the farm, for example. If there's disease in the neighborhood, we want to make sure that we are not borrowing equipment from neighbors. And if anything is being shared between farms, it's cleaned and disinfected beforehand. And then I guess the most practical and easiest um, biosecurity practice that we are successfully able to get farmers to do is just to have a separate pair of shoes for their farming activity. So have a pair of shoes where you enter into the production area that you can slip into. Take those shoes off when you leave the production area and put back on your street shoes. It's not expensive, it's easy to do, and it really offers a lot of value in making sure that we're not spreading disease onto a clean farm or taking infection off of an infected farm and carrying it down the street where a neighbor might be exposed to it. So those are just sort of a summary of some practices that seem to be effective.
So the next question is by Dr. Arjun Patel, Field Veterinarian, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. He asked, as per your observation, how important is community awareness and farmer participation in controlling transboundary diseases?
It is absolutely critical, and it's a huge challenge. And every country is different, of course. but trying to find out who is your most respected partner. Sometimes that in some countries that is the government. So if that's the case, then the government can be sharing good, valuable information about the status of a disease and what biosecurity practices should be implemented, et cetera. But in other cases, in other places, it maybe is the university, the agricultural university, the extension agents, if they are out there sharing information about the diseases that we're concerned about and how to prevent them, that can be received better. In other cases, it is important to have industry groups. So the swine association or the poultry association be sharing with their members, what are the real concerns, and these are the practices to implement, and this is why we need to do it to protect our industry, et cetera. Really, all of those stakeholders really need to play a part in helping producers understand, because the reality is that it starts on the farm. It starts at the farm level. Again, those simple, basic practices of separation and implementing basic biosecurity measures like, wearing shoes, et cetera. Different shoes on the production part of the farm. We can't regulate these things. We can't mandate them. I mean, we can clearly, but that doesn't get it done. What gets it done is by having the producers, the farmer, understand why it's important for him, why it's important for his family, why it's important for his community. So the simple answer to that question is yes. Producer engagement, producer education, and understanding is absolutely critical if we're going to prevent disease or respond effectively to a disease.
Thank you, sir, for a detailed answer. The next question is our last question too for today's webinar, asked by Ms. Manasa Dasari. For composting or above ground burial, how do we verify that time and temperature profiles actually inactivate high concern pathogens before releasing sites from quarantine?
Yeah, so certainly every country is different, but for composting, for example, the USDA has a protocol. So the protocol that we have is that we take temperatures in our compost piles every day. We take temperatures at half a meter and at a meter, so that we're making sure that we're understanding what's happening throughout the whole portion of that pile or windrow. We take that temperature every day. For composting of poultry, our protocol is that we compost for 14 days, taking temperatures every day. We want to make sure that during that 14 days, we have temperatures of 55 degrees C for at least 3 days during that 14-day period. Then we turn the pile and we let it go through another 14-day process, during which time we take temperatures, document temperatures, and we're looking to reach 55 degrees C for another 3 days in that process. So it's very specific for us. Certainly within India, I think our protocol is a model that you can use, but it would be up to you. I do want to be clear that the composting process is a process that enhances the activity of thermophilic microorganisms, so they generate a lot of heat. The reality is that we can inactivate pathogens very, very quickly in that environment. The fact that we go through a process that's 28 days is one to provide a high level of confidence, but also to break down the carcasses themselves. So at the end of that process, we can use that material as a soil amendment to provide nutrients, organic matter for crops, because at the end of that process, we do use that material. But for the shallow barrow with carbon, that's a different process. It has a different type of microorganism that is being facilitated there. It's as opposed to thermophilic, it's mesophilic. So we don't create the same level of temperature, but we still have very active biological activity that breaks down those carcasses. So, for example, I gave you the African swine fever example. Within 5 days, we were inactivating the African swine fever virus. For avian influenza and other viruses, it would be of a similar time. But the above ground burial or shallow burial with carbon process, we actually leave that in place for a year. And at the end of that year process, then we smooth the soil out and return it to its previous use. And that's to give time for the carcasses to decompose as well. Sometimes we'll plant crops right on top of that above ground burial trench or shallow burial with carbon. Those are two terms that are used for that practice because by the time that plant germinates, again, we're inactivating those pathogens, within 5 to 10 days. So we don't have a risk of, taking up pathogens, within a crop, et cetera. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Flory. We had a lot of questions, but we had to be very selective with them. Thank you for explaining all the questions in such detail. I really enjoyed today's webinar. It was a very new, interesting topic. And I saw one of the models was designed by your daughter, very, very inspiring.
Actually,
Yeah.
I will add that that's when she was in 6th grade. So she's been working with me on these projects for a very long time. But yeah.
That is a very unique solution. Like you can just put carbon layer and it is simple and effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I think with this we can end with the webinar. And as we come to the conclusion of today's webinar, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Gary Flory for sharing his invaluable knowledge and global experience with us. We also thank all the participants that joined us. So there were students, veterinarians, veterinary officers, researchers, a few faculty members, a total of 190 participants that have joined today live with us. And we hope this session has encouraged everybody to think in a bit more detail, give a little more thought to the animal carcass burial practices that are being followed, especially in the rural areas. So this webinar was, I think, insightful to the veterinary officers that are working in different parts of India. And thank you once again, Mr. Flory, for accepting my request to be a speaker, collaborating with us, being here with us. And thank you so much for your sharing your experience and knowledge. I'd also like to thank Yashika Pandey for taking time to be a co-host here and organizing the Q&A session. And also Swastika, thank you so much for being our moderator for this session. And with this, I would wish everybody a wonderful evening. Thank you.
So thank you so much to all the dignitaries present here. Veterinary is really glad to have all these brilliant people together in the session today. And I hope you all had a seamless experience. So with everyone's permission, we are now concluding the session in here for today and looking forward to have you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Swastika.
Yes, sir. Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Bye-bye.